My boyfriend's friend Melinda wanted to get him and started spreading false information. My name's Noel, and I'm 28 years old. I've been with my boyfriend, Curtis, he's 26, for just about 4 years now. For the most part, we've had a solid, easygoing relationship, nothing flashy or dramatic. Just two people doing life together, with a whole lot of patience and commitment. But over the last couple of months, someone new entered Curtis's life. Her name is Melinda. And while she's never been overtly inappropriate, there's been something about her that just doesn't sit right with me. I've tried to brush it off as paranoia or an overactive imagination. But I can't. And that's what brings me here. To give some context, Curtis and I started dating just before I moved across the country for a job I couldn't turn down. It was one of those rare, career-defining placements, exactly the kind of opportunity people dream of. So, after a lot of conversations and a mutual agreement, I packed my bags and left. We agreed to try long distance and figured we'd reassess if it got too hard. But the funny thing is, it worked for us. We got used to the phone calls, the long texts, the weekend visits. After a year, I came back for a few months, just in time for another offer, this one only a couple of hours away from Curtis. It wasn't ideal, but it was much better than being on opposite ends of the country. Curtis encouraged me to take it. "We'll see each other more this time," he said, and he meant it. And we did. I drove out almost every other weekend. He visited on holidays. Time flew by, and before I knew it, 5 years had passed. Last year, I moved back home for good. And just a month ago, Curtis moved in with me. Everything was falling into place. But now there's Melinda. Curtis is finishing up his degree in education, and recently he started mentioning her more often. I'd heard the name in passing before, she'd played on a few of his intramural sports teams over the years, but it was always background noise. Until now. It started casually. He'd tell me, "Melinda hurt her ankle in our game last night," or "Melinda and I had to present together for a group project." No big deal. But lately, her name pops up more and more. They've gotten closer, it seems, and Curtis doesn't seem to notice that something feels off. Now, let me say this, I am not a jealous partner. That's not my style. Curtis has a lot of female friends, and I genuinely get along with most of them. I don't believe in policing who your partner is allowed to be friends with. If someone ever did cheat on me, that's on them, not the person they cheated with. I wouldn't want to stay in that kind of relationship anyway. But this is different. Curtis told me that Melinda sees herself as one of the guys. She says she doesn't get along with other women because they're too much drama. She doesn't wear makeup, loves sports, and prides herself on being low maintenance. Now, I used to say the exact same things when I was younger, back in high school, when I was desperate for attention and trying to separate myself from other girls. So, I recognize the pattern. And I recognize that underneath all that I'm different energy can be a deep hunger for validation, especially from men. At this point, I still hadn't met Melinda. But my instincts were whispering no, shouting that something wasn't right. Then came the barbecue. Melinda's family hosted a small get-together to celebrate her graduation. Curtis was invited. I wasn't. None of the other friends' significant others were invited either, so I didn't think much of it. He went, had some food, came back. No big deal. But when he was telling me about it afterward, something in the way he recounted the conversation gave me pause. He mentioned meeting Melinda's mom, and how she seemed really curious about him. I asked, "What kind of questions?" Curtis shrugged. "Just general stuff. Where I'm from, what I'm doing after school. That sort of thing." Then he added, "She asked if I had a girlfriend, and when I said yes, she just kept asking why you didn't move back sooner. Why you'd leave when you could have stayed here. Why you picked work over being close." I blinked. "She said that?" Yeah, kind of like, she was surprised. Or maybe even judging it. He didn't say it like it was a big deal, but something in my stomach twisted. And then Melinda had jumped into the conversation, supposedly to defend me. "Oh, she's brilliant and doing great at her job. She's so ambitious," she'd told her mom. But it sounded too polished. Too sugary. Like she was playing a part. And when her mom started ranting about how women nowadays don't want families anymore and choose their careers over relationships, Curtis said he finally excused himself and went to chat with friends. That conversation stuck with me. Still, I was willing to give Melinda the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she just had an overbearing mom. Maybe it was a one-off. Then came the night she joined us for a recreational basketball game. Our team was short one woman, and co-ed rules required at least 2 women on the court. Curtis suggested Melinda, and I agreed. I thought it would be a good opportunity to meet her face to face and finally see for myself what kind of vibe she gave off. At first, everything seemed fine. Curtis introduced us, and Melinda was polite. Friendly, even. But then, during the game, Curtis made a silly mistake, bounced the ball off his foot, sent it out of bounds. Everyone laughed. It wasn't serious, just a funny moment. At halftime, Melinda walked over to me and said, "Curtis is such a goofball. Did you know he picks at his nails when he's frustrated?" I smiled, but inwardly, I paused. That felt oddly specific for a casual observation. Especially since he hadn't seemed frustrated at all. "I know his quirks," I replied. "Don't worry, we've been together for 3 years." She tilted her head and smiled. "Wow. 3 years? That's impressive." There was something behind that smile I couldn't place. Not sarcasm. Not exactly contempt. Just calculation. After the game, which we lost, not that anyone cared much, Curtis went to change, and Melinda lingered near me. "I'm so sorry I couldn't bring in a win," she said. "I know how competitive Curtis is. I really wanted to get you guys a win." I shrugged. "It's just rec league. It doesn't really matter." She leaned in a little. "Don't you care about his feelings? If winning is important to him, you should want to help him feel good at the end of the day." I was stunned. My jaw didn't drop, but my brain certainly did. What kind of comment was that? Thankfully, some teammates walked up and shifted the conversation. Curtis and I left shortly after I had worked the next day, but Melinda stayed out with a few of the others. Later that night, one of my teammates' girlfriends, who had joined the group for drinks, texted me, "Melinda's being weird. Keeps saying she wishes Curtis came out because she needs a familiar face. Said you made him go home." At that point, I stopped second-guessing myself. Something was going on. Not with Curtis, he hadn't changed or done anything suspicious. But Melinda? She was pushing a narrative. I could feel it. After that basketball night, I couldn't ignore the tension anymore. Melinda had officially crossed into strange territory, not by being outright mean or aggressive, but by planting these little comments that were clearly meant to stir discomfort. She wasn't confronting me directly, but she was making it known that she had a kind of insider knowledge about Curtis that I didn't, like I was the outsider in my own relationship. The next day, I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was reading into things. Maybe I was being sensitive. But when I mentioned Melinda's halftime comment to a close friend of mine, she didn't hesitate before saying, "That's weird. That's not a thing you say to someone unless you're trying to make them insecure." That gave me pause. Still, I wasn't going to bring it up with Curtis right away. Not because I was afraid of what he'd say, but because I was wary of how it might sound. You see, Curtis had a difficult history with an ex-girlfriend. She was possessive and emotionally manipulative, and she made him cut several women out of his life just to keep the peace. When Curtis and I first started dating, he told me clearly that he would never let someone control who he could be friends with again. I understood that. I even agreed with it. But it made things a little complicated now. Because I wasn't about to say, "You need to stop talking to Melinda." That's not what I believed, and it wouldn't be right to issue that kind of ultimatum. But I did want to say, "She makes me uncomfortable, and I think you need to know why." So I waited for a quiet evening, and I brought it up gently. "Can I tell you something that's been sitting with me?" I asked. Curtis nodded. He's a good listener, always has been. I told him about the basketball game. About Melinda's oddly personal comments. About how she'd spoken to me like she knew him in ways I didn't. I explained that it wasn't about jealousy. It was about boundaries. I even told him how her mom acted at the barbecue, how the whole thing felt like a weird performance that was somehow meant to undermine me, whether intentionally or not. To his credit, Curtis didn't get defensive. He didn't brush it off or accuse me of overreacting. In fact, he apologized for not noticing anything earlier. But he also admitted that sometimes he misses those subtle social signals, especially when it comes to other people's intentions. "I guess. I just don't pick up on that stuff the same way you do," he said. "If I'm not into someone, I don't think they're into me either." That made sense to me. Curtis was earnest to a fault, he never played games, and he rarely noticed when others were. But this wasn't just someone who had a harmless crush. Melinda's comments, her tone, her timing, it all pointed to something deeper, something strategic. So we came up with a plan. Curtis was supposed to attend a group dinner that weekend, a casual celebration for one of their classmates finishing a teaching practicum. Melinda would be there. I suggested that he politely back out. Not for dramatic effect, but just to test how Melinda would react. If she responds like a normal friend, I said, she'll probably just say, "Ah, bummer, hope everything's okay." But if she's got a stake in your decision, she'll let it show. Curtis agreed to text her. Nothing elaborate, just a message saying something came up and he wouldn't be attending. Her reply came in less than 5 minutes. Let me guess. Someone's not comfortable with me being there. Curtis stared at the screen and then looked at me, blinking. You predicted that, he said, almost amazed. I nodded. I know the type. Because I used to be the type. And I've seen this game before. That was the moment something clicked for him. He saw what I saw. We sat down together and began drafting a message, not an argument, not an accusation. Just a boundary. Curtis wanted to make it clear that he had no issue being polite in group settings, but that things had crossed a line. He also wanted her to know that I wasn't forcing this decision. It was his choice. The final message read something like this. Hey Melinda, I've been thinking a lot about some things, and I wanted to be honest. I've heard some feedback from people and had a few moments that made me realize there's been some tension I can't ignore. Noelle's told me that she's been uncomfortable with some of the dynamics, and I respect how she feels. I don't want this to be a conflict, but I also want to prioritize my relationship. For that reason, I think it's best that we keep our interactions to group settings, and even then, I'll likely be more reserved. I hope you understand. Curtis hit send around 11 p.m. We waited for a response. Nothing came. When I woke up, he still hadn't heard back. At first, I thought maybe she'd taken it well and was choosing not to escalate. That hope lasted until Curtis texted me from work around noon. She's messaging everyone. Like, everyone. Melinda hadn't responded to Curtis, but she had sent texts to nearly every person in their social circle, attaching screenshots of his message. She framed it as though he was being manipulated, that I was controlling him, and that she was deeply hurt by the whole thing. One of Curtis's closest friends, let's call him Blaine, was especially caught off guard. He and Melinda had apparently been seeing each other casually for a few months. No one had known this before. Blaine even called Curtis and said, "Hey, Melinda's really upset. She thinks you're being pushed into this. Do you really want to lose our whole group dynamic over this one issue?" Curtis tried to explain. He didn't say much, but he emphasized that it wasn't about control, it was about respect. About recognizing when someone in your life starts stepping into places they shouldn't be. But Blaine didn't really seem convinced. He also dropped another bomb. Melinda had asked him if he thought they should hold an intervention. Yes, that was her word, for Curtis. To talk some sense into him about what I was supposedly doing. It was surreal. Like something out of a bad reality show. Curtis and I were sitting on our living room floor later that night, just trying to process everything. I feel like I messed up his friend group, I told him. Like I became the villain in someone else's story. But Curtis shook his head. You didn't do anything wrong. And you're not the villain. You set a boundary. I listened. That's not drama, that's maturity. Still, I could feel the shift. Curtis's dynamic with that group was changing. And it wasn't because I told him to drop anyone, it was because the truth had come out, and now everyone had to decide what to do with it. Some of them would believe the narrative Melinda was pushing, that I was controlling, that I'd driven a wedge into their friendship. Others might see the situation for what it really was, someone who had been gradually undermining a relationship and didn't expect to be called out. The next few days would tell us who stood where. The days after Curtis sent his message to Melinda were an emotional marathon. Not because we were fighting, but because the fallout was larger than either of us expected. She didn't just take it personally. She made it public, at least, within the bounds of their small but tightly knit friend group. By the second evening, Curtis started getting screenshots from other friends. Melinda had privately messaged almost everyone in the group, each message slightly tailored, but all carrying the same theme, that Curtis was being influenced, maybe even manipulated, and that our relationship was beginning to isolate him from people who cared. Her tone was never overtly hostile. She was too clever for that. Instead, she cloaked her messages in concern. It just doesn't seem like him to cut people off, she wrote to one friend. I'm worried he's not thinking clearly, she said to another. He's being emotionally cornered, she told Blaine. I couldn't believe how fast the narrative shifted. Curtis, who had calmly and respectfully drawn a boundary, was suddenly being painted as a man under siege. And I? I was the architect of the siege. But Curtis wasn't shaken. If anything, he became even more resolved. I didn't expect her to react with kindness, he said. But I didn't think she'd campaign. That Friday, the group had a casual hangout planned at Blaine's apartment. Curtis debated whether to go. On one hand, he didn't want to make things more awkward. On the other, he didn't want Melinda's version of events to stand unchallenged. He decided to go not to cause drama, but to talk to Blaine and a couple of others face to face. That night, it all came unraveled. Curtis arrived to find Blaine, Nick, Evan, and a few others already there. Melinda wasn't present yet, but her presence loomed. As soon as Curtis walked in, Evan greeted him with a raised eyebrow. "Hey man. Heard you've had an interesting week." Curtis chuckled dryly. "Yeah, something like that." Nick, always more direct, said, "Melinda's been intense." "What's actually going on?" So Curtis explained. Not with accusations, not with anger. Just a clear timeline of events, how things had felt off, how I'd expressed discomfort in a calm and open way, and how the final message had been about creating healthy boundaries, not banishing anyone from his life. He also made sure to say something important: Noelle didn't tell me what to do. I chose to draw that line because I finally started seeing how it all added up. That's when Blaine's expression changed. He looked sheepish. And then he said something we didn't expect. "Okay, I guess I should tell you guys, Melinda and I have been seeing each other for a while now. Since around mid-January." Everyone paused. Curtis's eyes widened, but he didn't interrupt. "She told me she liked someone in the group," Blaine went on. "I assumed it was me because we got close so fast. She made the first moves. But lately, I've started thinking maybe it wasn't me she was after." There was a long silence. Then Nick, half joking but clearly annoyed, muttered, "You were the placeholder." Curtis didn't say anything. He just looked at Blaine, and Blaine looked back, guilt written all over his face. Then, as if summoned by drama itself, Melinda arrived. She walked in carrying a tote bag and a plastic container of homemade brownies. Her eyes were slightly red, like she'd been crying, but she smiled at everyone like nothing was wrong. When she saw Curtis, she froze. "Oh," she said. "You came." Curtis nodded. "Just here to talk." The room was quiet. Nick stepped out of the way and Melinda stepped forward. Her voice was fragile, trembling. "I guess this is it then, huh? I'm the villain now." It wasn't a question. It was a performance. No one responded right away. But then Blaine finally spoke, his voice tired. "You've been trying to drive a wedge between people, Melinda. Don't act like this is just happening to you." Her eyes darted to Blaine, and something cracked in her face. She shook her head. "No. You don't get to say that. You used me. You knew I wasn't over things. Curtis was the only one who treated me like a real person." That's when it became clear, her emotions were real, but her strategy had been just as real. Melinda had gotten too close. She'd pushed too far. And when boundaries went up, she panicked and lashed out. Curtis didn't yell. He didn't retaliate. He just stood there and said, "I hope you find what you're looking for, Melinda. But this thing between us, whatever it was, it crossed lines, and I'm not okay with that." She opened her mouth to respond, but then shut it again. And without another word, she turned and walked out. That night, Curtis came home exhausted. Not angry. Not triumphant. Just worn out. "I don't even know how to feel," he said. "It's like I've been walking around with blinders on." We didn't talk much more. We just sat together on the couch, our hands tangled, the silence between us finally peaceful. The next morning, he found out Melinda had left the group chat. She'd also unfriended almost everyone except Blaine. Blaine, to his credit, reached out to Curtis with an apology. He admitted he'd been caught up in it all, and that it took seeing Melinda's emotional unraveling to really understand what had been going on. He wasn't proud of his role, but he didn't shy away from accountability. Curtis appreciated that. He told Blaine things would take time, but he wasn't interested in cutting people off just to prove a point. That meant something. As for the rest of the group, they seemed relieved. Melinda had a way of dominating social spaces, and without her there, the atmosphere felt lighter. Like everyone had been unknowingly holding their breath. Nick even joked in the group chat later that weekend, "It feels like the boss battle is over. Time to enjoy the bonus level." The weekend after the confrontation, I expected things to calm down, and they mostly did. There were no more emotional texts, no new screenshots, no pop-up group chats. It was almost eerie how silent everything got. Curtis and I leaned into that silence. We ran errands together, cleaned out the closet, went to the farmer's market on Sunday morning. Life, for the first time in weeks, felt undramatic. Peaceful. Still. Then, on Monday, the unexpected happened. While I was at work, I got a message from an unfamiliar number. "Hi, this is Adeline. I'm Melinda's sister. Do you have a moment to talk?" It stopped me in my tracks. I stared at the message for a few minutes, uncertain. Part of me wanted to ignore it. After all, what could possibly be left to say? But curiosity got the better of me. I responded politely and asked if she preferred a call or text. She chose a call. We spoke for less than 10 minutes, but the conversation stayed with me long after. Adeline's voice was calm, steady, and surprisingly kind. She started by apologizing for their mother's behavior at the graduation barbecue. "That's not new," she said. "She's always been overly involved in Melinda's friendships and relationships. I think she saw your job and your independence and felt threatened, like it was a judgment on how she raised us." That stunned me a little. I hadn't thought of it that way before. Adeline continued, saying she was reaching out not to excuse Melinda's behavior, but to give some context. According to her, Melinda had had a rough couple of years emotionally. She'd struggled with comparison, with feeling left behind while others moved forward, especially in terms of relationships. "She's never been great with boundaries," Adeline admitted. "And she tends to convince herself she's the exception to the rule, especially when it comes to other people's boyfriends." She went on to explain that after the group fallout, Melinda had stayed with their parents for a few days. She was devastated, yes, but also angry. Not at Curtis, though. At me. She believed I'd taken him away from her chance at something better. That's how she phrased it to her family. That part stung, but I appreciated the honesty. I told her, Adeline said gently, that if a man has a girlfriend and you still believe you're the better match, that's not romance. That's entitlement. She asked if I needed anything from them: an apology, an explanation, reassurance. I told her I didn't. The truth had already played out in full view. Adeline thanked me for listening, and we hung up. That phone call felt like the real ending. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just the final puzzle piece sliding into place. Back on Curtis's side of things, there was one more ripple. That Friday, he and I were invited to a small Friendsgiving dinner hosted by Nick's girlfriend, Delia. We'd only met once before all the drama, but she'd reached out to me after the dust settled. She'd seen the way Melinda acted. She believed me. She wanted to get to know me better. So we went. It was low-key, warm, and cozy. There was way too much food, and someone brought a glitter-covered turkey centerpiece that refused to stop shedding. We talked, we laughed, we shared memes about awkward social circles. At one point, Delia even said, "Honestly, it feels like we were all holding our breath while Melinda was around. Now it just feels normal." Curtis nodded. "Yeah. Like we're finally allowed to be chill again." That night, after we got home, he turned to me on the couch and said, "You know what's wild? I don't feel bad anymore. I thought I'd regret losing that group dynamic. But I don't. I think I just regret not noticing things sooner." I reached for his hand. "That's okay. You saw it when it mattered." And he did. We both did. We talked a lot that weekend about how easy it is to miss the signs when someone's playing a long game of boundary pushing. About how kindness doesn't mean letting people treat you poorly. About how, just because someone is hurting, doesn't mean they're harmless. Most importantly, we talked about how to protect each other better, not just from others, but from the slow erosion that happens when you doubt your own instincts for too long. The aftermath has been surprisingly quiet. Melinda hasn't tried to contact either of us again. Most of the group has moved on, relieved to be free of the undercurrent that no one had fully recognized until it was gone. Blaine eventually sent Curtis a sincere message saying he was sorry for how everything unfolded. He admitted he was embarrassed, not just for being caught in Melinda's emotional tangle, but for not seeing that Curtis had simply acted out of love and respect. Curtis accepted the apology. They're not as close as they once were, but there's no animosity now, just that gentle distance that happens when people grow differently. Nick and Evan, for their part, leaned all the way into humor. The group chat is now filled with random food photos, memes about student teaching disasters, and the occasional sarcastic comment about dramatic exits and friendship manifestos. That last part was inspired by something truly surreal. Apparently, before removing herself from all social media, Melinda sent a 17-page Google Doc to Blaine titled, "My Perspective." It read like a strange combination of memoir and self-help blog, including sections like "How I Was Misunderstood," "Love in the Shadows, a Case Study," "When Friends Choose Sides, the Reality of Modern Emotional Warfare." She included reading recommendations at the end, including Daring Greatly and the Four Agreements. Blaine didn't send the whole thing, just a screenshot of the table of contents. Curtis and I stared at it, speechless. Did I just get turned into a TED Talk prompt? I asked. Curtis laughed. You're iconic now. But joking aside, the entire situation has left me with a profound understanding of boundaries, intuition, and how love can be tested not only by conflict but by the quiet undermining of it. Melinda wasn't evil. She was hurting. But being in pain doesn't give someone the right to invade someone else's peace. In the end, she lost control of a story she was trying to write alone. And in doing so, she exposed the truth more clearly than we ever could have. As for me and Curtis, we're stronger now. We become better at checking in with each other, at catching the small discomforts before they grow. We're not perfect, but we're real. If you're in a relationship and something feels off, if someone's behavior makes your stomach twist, even just a little, listen to that voice. It might not be jealousy. It might not be insecurity. It might just be the part of you that refuses to be treated like an afterthought. And that part deserves to be heard. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.